Welcome back to another SpotOn chat. I'm Rebecca Monet, President and Chief Scientist with Zorakle Profiles. We provide profiling tools for franchisors and franchise consultants that help facilitate a right fit between a prospective franchisee and a franchise system. So I know no other person more knowledgeable or passionate about franchising than my guest today, Stan Friedman. Now, many of you know Stan is president of FRM Solutions, but what you may not know is that Stan serves on the IFA Educational Foundation's Leadership Council, the IFA Supplier Board. Stan is also a founding member of the IFA Diversity Institute, and he co-created the Professional Athlete Franchise Initiative with NFL veteran Michael Stone. Stan is a board member of the Southeast Franchise Forum in Atlanta and an advisory board member with the Titus Center for Franchising. And he still finds time to produce and host Franchise Today, a weekly podcast dedicated to franchising, where he interviews leading franchise executives and serves an audience of franchisors and franchise professionals. So welcome, Stan. I'm so glad you are back with me today.
Happy to be with you, Rebecca. Happy to be with you always.
We always have such great conversations and such fun time together. I was actually thinking about a conversation you and I had on the phone last week, I believe it was. And I was asking you how you had time for all of these things you're doing. You're coaching people, you're mentoring people, you're guiding companies, you're sitting on these boards and educational foundations, and how you have time, and what is the driver or the motivator within you that keeps you continuing to do this while running the podcast, while being president of FRM. What is it that makes you do it? And you used the term that I had never heard before. And you said, Rebecca, I'm paying it back. Can you elaborate on that for me a bit?
Sure. And literally, a lot of those things are all connected to each other. So it's like one to many. If you can do one deed or one task or one thing that serves a multitude of things, so that it's kind of like not linear, but it's quantum, like franchising really is all about that, right? So sometimes it looks like there's a lot more that you probably don't have time for, but a lot of those things are pulling multiple things along at the same time, not just one. So it kind of works that way pretty well. Paying it back is really paying it back by paying forward. So in my early days in franchising, there were a couple of people that were pretty instrumental in getting my career started. One guy named George Slusser, who brought me into franchising and trained me to become a franchise salesperson in real estate franchising, conversions of independent real estate brokers for ERA Real Estate, which is now ERA Franchise Systems. George hired me not once, not twice, but 3 times in my career, each time making me a much better and stronger executive for the time spent with him, and then letting me go to a better offer or opportunity instead of trying to keep me back, knowing that he'd bring me back again. And he did that 3 times. And each of the 3 times I came back a lot further up the ladder than the times before when I left. So George was one guy. Dennis Fuller was another, who had Blimpie hired me and took me away from a miserable place that I didn't want to be, and saved me from having to move, pick up stakes and leave Atlanta and go to Dallas for a company I didn't like. And Dennis became a godfather to me there too. And then Dennis, weeks after he brought me on board, was going to be gone, and I was going to be his replacement, which wasn't the way it was set up when I was brought in.
Wow.
And literally that could have turned ugly, but it didn't. Dennis took me and we went to the IFE together, which was the first time I went to the IFE. It was in the 90s sometime. He introduced me to everybody that he knew, and he'd been around for a very long time. Everybody knew Dennis. And Dennis just transferred what was then called a Rolodex, right?
Yeah.
He transferred his Rolodex to me. He told everyone, Rhonda Sanderson and all that, just Tom Porci, all of them, everybody, this is the guy at Blimpie. This is the guy who is, whatever you would do for me, you do for him now.
Wow.
And literally transferred all of his cachet to me. So when I say I'm paying back, every one of those silly ribbons that are underneath my name at an IFA convention on my badge are initiatives that I've said yes to that I could have and maybe should have said no to, because it's, like you said, it's one more thing that you're devoting time and energy toward. But it's my way of paying back. It's my way of knowing that I'd not have had the jump start that I'd had from the tutelage and the lessons learned from people like George and people like Dennis. It would have taken me years more to ever get, if I would have ever arrived at the same destination or not. It would have been a lot more daunting. It would have been a lot more difficult than it ever was because of those two guys. And so every time I get asked to do something, it's payback. It's the others that did for me, and I do now for others who ask of me. And to me, it's paying forward by paying back.
Paying back.
But it's the paying back part that really, I check another box off every time I take another one of those silly ribbons.
Wow. What a great way to look at it. A few years ago, I don't know if it was Jim Amos or Mark Kickenap wrote some kind of article called Bridge or Bridges. I don't know if you remember it.
I don't remember it.
It was so well written, and it was talking about the idea of building bridges for those that are coming behind us.
Yeah, that sounds like a Kickenap. It sounds to me like something Mark would have written.
Yeah, and it really struck me, and it's kind of what you are living. Those that went before you in franchising, the pioneers and the folks that had to knock down the jungle to get through, have left some stones or some things in place to build a bridge for the next, in this case, when the baton was passed over to you from Dennis and others, you were able to take the baton and go even further because they built bridges for you. And now you're doing the same for others, whether that's professional athletes, whether it's other diverse groups or franchisors that you're consulting with and helping, that especially if they're a smaller franchisor, to get to that next level. You're building that next bridge because somebody built the bridge for you.
And then, that's really what my podcast does too. And that's what I've tried to focus on doing, is bringing on guests that have been there and done that. People who have been able to put the word sustainable in front of growth and sensible in front of franchising. And they're not theorists. They
doers.
Yes, they've gotten it done. They are living on recurring revenue, not initial franchise fees. They don't have to sell a deal to make a payroll. They are successful people. And they're also people who are willing to do the same thing that you and I are talking about right here. They're willing to drop some breadcrumbs and some nuggets. And during the course of the interview, when we talk about how franchising found them and how they've grown their business and their life through franchising, and I asked them all, please share with the audience a couple of things that you'd advise, or a couple of things you'd advise they not do, the way you've done it. Spare them some of the things that they don't have to live through that you can help them with. And literally, the podcast is a vehicle for that. And my audience is comprised largely of emerging franchisors and franchise executives that all dial in. I've had a lot of comments from people that say IFA ought to give CFE credits for listening to
should. I agree.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll talk about that at a later date. We'll get through all the craziness of 2020. Maybe we'll talk about that in 2021.
Yeah. I think sometimes because a lot of our lives are the school of hard knocks. You got a PhD in the school of hard knocks, right? So your podcast and the way you question people, you do it with me when you're coaching me. You ask questions. You don't, lecture. You ask questions, and then I come to an awareness through it. And I think oftentimes what's happening on your podcast is as you're talking to someone, what they did intuitively or accidentally, or because someone they observed did it wrong, so they did it differently, oftentimes they're not able to articulate it until you ask the questions. And then all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, this is what I did, or this is how I came to that conclusion, or so-and-so shared this, and then I fine-tuned it a little bit and went that way. And now the listener gets the experience simply because you moved that interviewee through a process by asking the right questions. Oftentimes they don't even themselves know how they got where they got. At least that's been my experience when I observe you.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. It's very different hosting it than it is listening to it. So I might not hear the things that you're hearing from that perspective, but I appreciate you sharing it that way.
Yeah, it's like a self-discovery process, and then you see yourself in the shoes of that executive or that emerging franchisor as you're listening, going, oh shoot, I'm also dealing with that. Here's a way that maybe I can move through it. So as always, Stan, I so appreciate our conversations. Thank you for being here, and I will see you at the next Spot On chat.
Looking forward to it.